Hello, welcome to Avery's Garage. We're going to take a look inside and see what we got. So this is the main project of the moment. I've been calling it Little Ghost. It's a collage of many different types of things, and we're going to talk a little bit today about all of the ideas and parts and pieces that have gone into this car so far and where we're going to go with it in the future. So first off, we're going to just do some walk around things and talk about all the different parts and pieces that have gone into the car so far, and some of the ideas that kind of inspired the car coming together, and places that I got those inspirations from. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So first off, we're going to talk about the back of the car here. So you can see the body is comprised of a bunch of different parts and pieces, all spliced together and welded and tacked and everything. Right now we're in the mock-up stage. So everything that's coming together is just sort of temporarily welded with these little tack welds. You can see them across the fender there to kind of give us an idea what the car is going to look like. Eventually, when I start to finish the car, I'm going to be going back through and welding up all those seams and cleaning them and grinding them, but that's like a down the road kind of thing. So here at the back, let's go ahead and talk about some of the parts and pieces that have gone into the back of the car. These fenders are created from a bunch of different things I had lying around. The grooved, like stepped piece here is the outer part of, like, I want to call it a 1920s Essex fender. And I have a bead roller that I created the extra bead from to match this design here, because I've got these fenders up front that are actually off of a Hudson, and I wanted to match the design on those front fenders from like a 1920s Hudson to look like these back fenders here, which have been created by all these different parts and pieces put together. Now the next thing we're going to talk about here is the back door. This back door is actually a side door off of a four-door sedan that would have been, I believe, like a 1926 Dodge. And you can see it's kind of all tacked together and outlined here. The original door is this section around here, and it's been chopped quite significantly. You can see all the little slices that have come together. This whole car is highly modified, and the windows are really small, but what we've got at the back is like a 6-inch tall window, and then it moves up to like an 8-inch tall window as you go along the side. So the back door here works via this little latch, which is actually an original latch right here. That's the interior latch. We don't have an outside door latch yet. And you can see it opens to the side there. And inside we've got some things mocked up. This is the fuel tank, or at least the beginnings of the fuel tank. As you can see, it's got some holes in the side there. That's not correct because of the way the tank is sitting in the vehicle. So I'm gonna have to modify that tank and weld it up, and that'll be like its own little project video on that thing right there. And underneath the tank, you can see some of the substructure in the frame. The differential we've got here is out of like a 70s Jaguar, and it's an independent differential set, modified and added into this framework that we've built. Now let's talk about these tail lights here. So these are actually like a house light that are completely modern. I bought them from like a home improvement store, and I tinted the lenses with paint and created some backlit pieces here so I could create like kind of a carriage light, because the whole idea behind this vehicle is to give it like 20s era look, like 1920s race car. So obviously this is not like something you would have probably seen on a car from this time period, but I did it stylistically and I think they look pretty cool. Now those lights are paired with this license plate light, which, as you can kind of see here, is backlit with the stop lettering. And this would be a light that you would have found on like a late 1920s, early 1930s Ford, probably a Model A is what that would have come off of. I have no idea where this light came from. It's some sort of a spotlight, but we're going to use this as a reverse light just because it's kind of cool and it's fully adjustable. So that's why we chose to go with that. Now we're going to talk about the roof. So the roof is made up of a lot of different pieces. This back section here, our curved panel here, and the panel through here, I don't really know what that's from. It's also this piece in here and on the other side. It could be like a Studebaker or something. It was like a part that I had lying around and I just chose to cut it up and modify it to make this back section of the roof. Whenever possible, I like to use vintage tin because I feel like that gives an extra dimension to the car. It makes it more authentic when you use real steel from the time period. So I try to do that whenever possible. This section in here, and then this piece and this piece are obviously fresh, modern steel. I have a English wheel here. Let's get back so you can kind of see it. And I use the English wheel to make pieces like this. It's got a little bit of a curve this way to it and then a curve this way to it. Now that center section there comes into this piece here, which is actually a highly modified hood skin from a 1965 Ford Falcon. The original hood ornament would have gone in this region here, and I've modified it significantly so that it would become this new roof panel. And I quite like this detail, this, here, let me get the camera straight, this sort of grooved and raised detail. It gives the roof a really neat dimension. And then that comes around into this front visor piece, which shares originality to the back door of this vehicle. This visor is off of the same body. That back door is like a 1926 Dodge. This is the same sort of piece. This came from a 26 Dodge. And it's been cut down the center and modified. You can see it's got kind of a kick out to it. It would have been straight across to begin with, and now we've kind of got this nice V shape to it in both directions. And that's been reinforced and rebuilt with this cool little vent here that's got some round rod pieces underneath there to put it together. And overall, this gives kind of like a sort of Art Deco-y airplane kind of design to the roof that I quite like. Let's talk about the side panels. So this section through here, you can see there's a lot of tack welds and a lot of different parts and pieces coming together. This upper section is part, or several parts I should say, of doors from that same 26 Dodge, which has donated a lot of parts to this car. So this frame has been modified and cut and lengthened. You can see it's multiple doors put together to create this overall window section. And then I wanted to have the bead molding to match the front door here, which we'll get to in a moment where that came from. So I again found tin pieces in my scrap that kind of created that molding to mimic what was on the front door over here. So now this front door is actually kind of cool because this is where the whole project began. Let's see if we can get a wider shot of that. There we go. So this front door is actually part of a 28 Studebaker, I believe. And I have some pictures that we'll show you here in a moment. And those pictures kind of show how I began with this piece. It was just a framework and I reskinned the bottom of the door and then chopped it. And that's how I kind of began the body of this car, was with these doors. And then I added on all these other pieces over time to create the whole picture. And then, you can just kind of step back. You can see down here on the lower section, these are just different panels of steel that came off of that 26 Dodge body that was pretty well scrap. But I kind of cut and spliced so that we could create new body panels out of those leftover parts. So let's talk about the cowl, which is this section of the body right here. Now, this, we don't quite know what it is. I bought it from an individual, and it's like a $100 car part. And I cut 6 inches out of the center there to narrow it, because this whole car is quite a bit narrower than it would be like a stock vehicle from that time period would have been. So I cut that section out of the middle to narrow it, right? And then it's got this really cool belt molding here. Let's see, we'll get in a little closer. You can see it's got the raised detail through here, and it comes into that belt molding up and through. And then I've added these pieces here to tie into the belt molding on the body across through that section there. And I really like this piece. It's got like a neat, ornate, curved design to it that actually matches really well with our grill shell. So eventually we're going to have a nice hood to go between this nice grill shell and that cowl section. And then this area above the cowl, our windshield frame, you can see it's set up like a split windshield, which is a little bit newer than 1920s design, but I felt like it fit the lines of this car, so that's why I built it that way. Now that framework is created from fresh new steel. You can kind of see. And then those side pieces here will kind of come in and take a good close look at that. These are all hand fabricated sections, multiple patterns and parts put together, and gives you that really nice combination of curves and lines. You can kind of see the windshield has a little bit of a tilt forward at the bottom, and it kind of flows back, sort of aerodynamically speaking. Really nice arch to the center of that visor there. So let's talk about the headlights. These things are maybe my favorite feature of this vehicle, okay? They're from a 1928 to 29 or 30 Cadillac, and these things are absolutely massive. Let's get some perspective there. This is a 13-inch headlight, and one of these I found at a swap meet probably 5 or 6 years ago. And I bought just the one because I thought it was super cool. I didn't really know what I was going to do with it because I only had one of them. But I found a second one on eBay. So now I have this cool pair of headlights. And in a lot of ways, I decided to build this car just for these headlights. I really wanted to have a way to showcase these two beautiful, beautiful pieces. Let's talk about our mascot or hood ornament here. So, this guy right here is the beginnings of the hood ornament for this cool vehicle we're building here. And there's a lot of going on with him. He's going to be a likeness of Pazuzu, which is a sort of demon, I guess you would call him, but he's like a guardian of the weather and the winds, right? So yeah, you know, demons are not necessarily your friend, I guess, but this guy, like, you kind of want him watching your back, right? Now, what's really going to be cool about him, you can kind of get an idea of the wings and the face and stuff. I've got some LED lights that are going to go in his eyes, so he'll actually be tied into the headlights, which I think is going to be really cool. And he's sitting atop where the original radiator cap would have been. Obviously, we're going to have like a different, more modern radiator in here, so that's not what that's going to be. But now he's just like our cool hood ornament. And then there's this component right here. Now this is really super cool. This is actually trench art from World War II era. It came from my grandfather. He built this a long time ago. Don't know exactly when. And you can see it's made out of bullets, but this outer ring is actually a large artillery shell cut down to create that outer ring. Which again, this ornament kind of ties in. You've got like the Demon of the Winds, right? And then you've got this cool airplane design with the trench art bullets, and just super interesting. And at some point we'll like make a video just dedicated to finishing off our little friend here, Pazuzu. So let's talk about the engine. So what's cool about this is these valve covers here. There's a good view of it. So these valve covers are actually off of a 331 Cadillac motor from like the 50s, okay? And I cut down the tops of the valve covers and modified them to fit these lower sections. You can kind of see where the seam and stuff is. And I added those Cadillac valve covers basically to an old Chevy valve cover, because the engine that I'm going to be putting in this vehicle is actually a 283 small block Chevy. This motor is not that motor. This is a mock-up block simply for weight and mounting points. I will show you the actual motor that's going to go in this car. So here's our engine. This is a 1957 283 small block Chevy engine, and it's been completely rebuilt, okay? And it's got like a 40 over aluminum piston in it, higher compression motor, 10-to-1, and a nice aluminum Edelbrock intake, kind of a vintage intake. And we got an old Edelbrock carb sitting there. It's probably not the carburetor I'm going to use, but you know, it's maybe one I'll rebuild for it, or I'll get a new one for it. Haven't decided yet. Some of the things that make this motor kind of unique: it's got the oil fill breather's tower here. So this is where you put the engine oil in. It's also a breather for the crankcase of the engine to vent. And this is important because the valve covers that I showed you a little bit ago over here have no entry point into them. They're just like a solid valve cover, right? So you have to have some sort of breather, and you need to have a place to fill your oil. And then we'll be using a modern distributor. This is kind of just a mock-up. This is like a later model GM HEI distributor. I'm probably going to go for a small cap distributor because that's large enough that it's probably going to get in the way of my brake booster. So we'll have to change that down the road. Let's talk suspension. All right, so in here you can see the rear differential. Now that is out of a 70s Jaguar. Not sure exactly what year. It's a used component that I acquired this suspension from somewhere on Facebook, or excuse me, Craigslist. So that's the rear suspension. 70s Jaguar, independent suspension. You got your coilover springs there. So this rear differential has a 331 gear set in it. All right. Now, I decided I wanted to make this crazy vehicle four-wheel drive. So, what I purchased to achieve that is this unit right here, which also has a 331 gear set in it. This is out of a 2004 F-150. So this is also an independent suspension setup. I acquired upper and lower control arms and CV axles, as well as spindles and brakes that all matched this differential. So now, with this Ford front differential and our Jaguar rear differential, we have a matched four-wheel drive independent suspension setup. This crossmember unit and all of these pieces here, I built from scratch to adapt to this. And as you can see, there's this really crazy spacer I had to build to go between the differential housing and this passenger side, well, driver's side, but we'll get to that in a minute. Get to this CV axle, right? Because I needed more width. Now, it's hard to tell from these pictures and these videos, but this car is really wide. It's over 7 feet wide. And the reason behind that is so that we could get the suspension to work correctly and so that we could get this drive line to function. That's your front drive line going underneath the header there. Kind of crazy, but totally functional. Spins, clears, really cool. Let's talk about the drivetrain that makes this four-wheel drive machine possible. So I will show you. In here, we have not built floors yet, so you can kind of see how all this works. We've got here, let's see if it'll focus okay. It's a little dark inside here. So this is a S10 5-speed manual transmission and an S10 transfer case. You can see the front drive line, which goes forward to our front differential there. Now, because of the location of the shifter, I had to build this crazy mechanism here. You can kind of see how it rocks back and forth to control that 5-speed shifter. And you know, here's the crazy thing about this car. No, this video is not like reversed or anything. This is a right-hand drive vehicle, and there's a reason for that. If you look inside, there's not a whole lot of space on the floorboard on this side because of the drive line. So I intentionally made the car right-hand drive so that I can have space for my pedals, which you can kind of see it's sort of dark. A little bit of focus, maybe a little bit more light. So here's one of the coolest components of this car. Let me see if we can get a good look at it here. This is a yoke out of an airplane. And if you look real close there, it says commuter on it, which I intend to drive this vehicle as much as possible. So it's kind of funny. It's going to be my commuter, and it's got a commuter steering wheel or yoke out of an airplane. And then we've got our little suicide knob here so you can turn the steering wheel with ease. And it's actually quite comfortable with our grips. And you can see underneath there's our pedals, our clutch, brake, and gas pedal around there on the side. The dashboard in this vehicle is another component of that 26 Dodge that donated so many parts to this car. So to tie our crazy airplane steering yoke into our steering system, I built my own column here with a bearing at this point and then under the dash where you can't see it. And then that rolls through to a support right there, support bearing. And then we've got our first steering joint. And then that steering shaft comes down here to another support bearing, another joint, and then another joint, and into our steering mechanism. This is a rack and pinion steering from like a Mustang 2. And it's been adapted to match these Ford F-150 ends.